Hello, my name is Zhorea McAnuff, and I will be discussing the impact of unconscious bias on well-being and what your organization can do to mitigate that impact. Now, unconscious bias is an organizational problem that affects the individual and the organization by negatively impacting overall well-being. Well-being is necessary to sustain an organization's culture, but it is threatened when individuals fail to be mindful of negative behaviors that reflect unconscious biases. According to networking industry giant LinkedIn, workplace bias costs organizations nearly $64 billion annually to replace employees who were discriminated against. And this isn't even including legal fees as well. Now, since high employee turnover is an indication of a severe issue within organizations, the question is not whether unconscious bias impacts well-being or not. Rather, how can organizations reduce the negative impacts of unconscious bias at work? Now, unconscious bias, we are going to clarify a few things when it comes to unconscious bias first, and then we'll discuss the impact and as well as some suggestions and then closing statements. So first, what is bias? What is unconscious bias? So bias is a natural part of the human experience, and it has helped humans maintain quick conclusions for centuries to reduce the chance of death or injury. Now, in present day, unconscious bias does not have a place at work, and because it can negatively impact others. So all of us do have some unconscious bias, but it is also up to us to reduce the negative impacts that may have on others and to be mindful and aware of those biases that we may have. Now, unconscious bias occurs when an individual makes assumptions based on stereotypes without being aware of the conclusion made, and that's how you get unconscious bias. Now, there are a few different kinds of unconscious bias. So the first that we're going to discuss is affinity bias. This is the tendency to align with, believe, and or engage with others who are similar to you in apparent characteristics. Now, you may have the same hair color, you may have the same eye color, you may be the same gender as this person, and that brings us to gender bias. Now, gender bias is unfairly assigning stereotypical attributes to an individual based on their gender. And then halo effect, that's unequal treatment based on a noticeable trait. So whether maybe a person has a very noticeable trait and you treat them differently because you assume because of that trait that they express a certain characteristic. Now, that's not always true. And that is a form of unconscious bias as well. Now, ageism, that's unfairly assigning stereotypical attributes to an individual based on their age. And contrast bias, that's unequal treatment of an individual by assigning external attributes to their success or failure. In turn, they overestimate or underestimate the individual skills when compared to another. Now, the impact, so decreased employee job satisfaction and engagement. Employees become less satisfied with the organization as a result of unconscious bias because it threatens their need for security and safety at work. And once they feel like that's threatened, then employees often can result to some other way to feel secure or safe, and that could be in the form of withdrawal behaviors. Now, employees, they could also withhold their own ideas or solutions to solve problems, as well as being subjected to unconscious bias at work. Now, research does show that over a third of employees who experience bias at work feel alienated and withhold ideas and solutions, which increases the amount of stress hormones the person incurs. Stress hormones can last for almost half of an 8-hour day, an 8-hour workday. Now that's about 3 to 4 hours, and it can severely impact focus and proper cognition functioning. And now with continual exposure to workplace bias over time, this severely cripples an employee's ability to work effectively and efficiently, and it destroys their well-being over time. And that's how you can see some of these high employee turnover rates, and also more of those withdrawal behaviors that I mentioned before. Now, unconscious bias, it has been proven to impact every level of the organization, not just a specific area or not a specific group of people, but it impacts pre-hire applicants, including the recruitment process, middle management, top management, and all employees as well. Now, there are a few ways that a few things that you can do in order to reduce the negative impacts of unconscious bias at work. And some of these are really going around the idea of mindfulness. Now, the first we're going to talk about is inclusive hiring and recruitment methods. We'll talk about creating a mindful culture and also sustaining that mindful and inclusive culture. Now, for inclusive hiring methods, blind recruitment. Now, when reviewing resumes of potential new hires, remove all identifying demographic information like name, their geographic information, any other identifying information for that specific applicant, to reduce the chance of unconscious bias from interfering with choosing the best candidate for the position and fit for the organization. And this can be done in a variety of different ways with different software. One of them is including AI technology, and a lot of them are free softwares as well. Now, to cultivate a mindful culture, mindfulness, it's basically the heightened and purposeful awareness of one's interactions with themselves, the environment, and the social context. Now, mindfulness, it allows individuals to address their unconscious biases and broaden their perspectives by actively thinking through the root of their ideas and emotions before acting. And this removes the need to use stereotypes to make those conclusions or to make decisions. Now, this can be done in a couple different ways. One way is through the use of interactive diversity and inclusion training to teach and practice mindfulness with small groups of employees. So work teams, we're looking about group size between 5 to 7 or 7 to 10. And this can be a time for employees to share experiences with each other that increases their awareness of the challenges that others may face, but do not speak about at work. Now, this would introduce a level of vulnerability and connection through understanding, which will strengthen the trust between employees and ultimately the organization. And also mindful and inclusive communication and policies. So we need to also look at the system itself. And policies, we're referring to code of conduct, standards, et cetera, any written codes that employees may need to follow. And this should use inclusive language that does not discriminate against diverse groups. Now, this should look at hair policies, head covering policies, clothing policies, and things of that nature. If you're unsure of what might need to be addressed, you can always consult an external DEI consultant, or you can speak to your employees as well. You should be speaking to them throughout this entire process. Now, management and leadership, they should also be trained to use mindfulness as a technique when dealing with difficult situations or with individuals who are different from themselves. When mindfulness is demonstrated by leadership, followers, employees, they will unconsciously act similarly. And mindfulness improves the positive perception of the environment, broadens perspective, and reduces that unconscious bias in the workplace. Now, in order to sustain that inclusive and mindful culture, you're going to want to quantify the development and impact of diversity initiatives. And this can help provide another perspective, not only for the organization, but for employees to see that the initiatives put into place and their commitment to improving them, that they're actually benefiting the employees and actually helping. Now, this also allows the organization to objectively see the value of DEI initiatives as well. And this allows the organization to view what is working well, what might not be working so well, and where there might need to be like improvements or different initiatives put into place. Again, you are also talking to your employees and getting feedback from them throughout this whole entire process. Now, I stress talking to your employees after creating an inclusive culture. It must be maintained. Regularly checking in with employees to discuss what is going right and what can be improved on shows employees that the organization sees DEI as an organizational value and not just another thing that they have to do, another check mark, something that's just required of them. They actually see that you, the organization, are committed to inclusivity, and you are also committed to making your employees feel safe, secure, and valued at work. Now, this is a quote from Teresa McHenry. She's general manager, HR marketing at Microsoft. Now, the point isn't to get people to accept that they have biases, but to get them to see for themselves that those biases have negative consequences for others. And now that you also see that everyone has biases and that those biases have negative consequences for others, how are you as an organization going to reduce the negative impacts that they have on your employees' well-being? Thank you.